Welcome back, you night owls. Tonight we wander into the chambers of power, rot and whispers. We follow a king who once split the church in two, who dined like 10 men and married 6 women, yet ends his life more ghost than monarch. The air is thick with the smell of damp stone and something faintly metallic. Old blood, maybe. Outside, it's the winter of 1546, and the candles in Hampton Court flicker against the frost-laced glass. But inside the palace, where tapestries hang heavy and footsteps echo cautiously, one man's body is waging a war against itself. You're about to witness the final stretch of Henry VIII's life, and spoiler alert, they probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere chilly, somewhere warm, or somewhere in between, post your location and the local time in the comments below. I love seeing our little bedtime history club light up across the map. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It begins with a grunt. Not the kind of royal proclamation a young Henry once bellowed from horseback, but the low, resentful kind. A sound that comes from deep inside, echoing past organs too tired to keep secrets. In December of 1546, King Henry VIII is 55 years old, but 55 in Tudor time, especially after living like, well, Henry VIII is practically ancient. The man who once jousted with reckless charm now must be hoisted by winches to mount a horse, and even that's rare these days. He's enormous now, nearly 400 pounds. His once mighty frame is padded with layers of fat that strain his doublets, and require special reinforcements in chairs, beds, and even the royal toilet. You know things are bad when carpenters become more vital than courtiers, but it's not just size, it's smell. Behind closed doors, the king's infamous leg wound, an old jousting injury gone septic, oozes relentlessly. The stench is so pungent that even loyal attendants pinch their noses behind embroidered sleeves. It's said the wound is so deep you could see the bone, though historians still argue whether that's hyperbole or just deeply unfortunate fact. And yet, the man still insists on being obeyed. The formalities never stop. "Your Majesty," echoes down the hallways, even when all the Majesty can do is wheeze from his chamber. He clings to the symbols of his authority, the sceptre, the great seal, the divine right. But his grip on reality, and on his health, is loosening with every tick of the candle clock. His days begin not with sunlight, but with muttered Latin prayers and strained groans. Servants enter carefully, alert for mood swings. Some have seen chairs thrown, others insults hurled like arrows. Occasionally the king softens, remembers names, chuckles at a jester's joke, or strokes a favoured hound's velvet ears. But those moments are fleeting. Mostly there's silence, interrupted by fits of coughing or the agonised exhale of someone whose body has become his own dungeon. Outside his chamber the world still fears him. Inside it mostly pities him. The hallways near his apartments are quieter now. Foot traffic is light, and conversation happens in whispers. Even courtiers with something urgent to say often leave notes instead, because no one wants to be the one who enters the lion's den when the lion is both toothless and irritable. Now and then, Henry tries to hold court. He'll summon advisors or ambassadors, often dressed in multiple layers to mask the sweating, swelling flesh beneath. One of his last appearances includes a lavish Christmas banquet. Lavish, mostly in theory. He's rolled into the hall on a wheeled platform like a grim parody of his younger self. Surrounded by golden plates and goblets of spiced wine, he can barely keep his eyes open. He picks at roast swan, but eats little. The swan dies in vain. Despite it all, he insists on being addressed as if nothing has changed. Letters sent in his name are worded with the same thunderous confidence. Henry, by the grace of God, King of England, France and Ireland, Defender of the Faith. That last part, Defender of the Faith, is a title gifted by the Pope before their legendary falling out. Technically it was revoked, but Henry keeps using it anyway. Classic. Privately he obsesses over his legacy. It's not just about being remembered. Oh no, it's about how he'll be remembered. The man who brought England to the edge of religious revolution now wrestles with what parts of himself will be edited out of the final portrait. He consults physicians who prescribe everything from potions to prayers. One suggests wrapping the leg in linen soaked with vinegar and rosewater. Another recommends goat dung and honey. Spoiler, none of it works. And no, sadly there is no miraculous healing montage here, only infection, discomfort, and daily dread. Still, advisors surround him. Some bring news from Parliament. Others read aloud dispatches from abroad, especially from France and the Holy Roman Empire. Henry listens, sometimes nods, but more often stares into the fire, lost in a labyrinth of regrets and suspicions. The man who once danced in jewelled boots now orders executions from bed. His paranoia, never particularly modest, is now practically a roommate. But even bedridden, he's dangerous. That's the thing about dying monarchs. They tend to take others down with them. A whispered accusation can still summon the tower's gates to swing open. Even in his twilight, Henry signs death warrants. Though some wonder if he always knows what he's signing. His counsellors present papers at opportune moments, and Henry, foggy and feverish, obliges with the royal scrawl. Whether out of clarity or confusion is sometimes unclear. This ambiguity is a quiet weapon. Some say Edward Seymour, the Duke of Somerset, begins to wield it skillfully, preparing for a time when the real power will be behind a throne rather than on it. Others point fingers at Bishop Gardiner or Sir Anthony Denny. Historians still argue whether any single man truly controlled those final months, or whether Henry, gasping but grasping, kept them all just unsure enough to be afraid. One strange habit emerges during these months. Henry starts dictating letters to his children. To Mary, his eldest, he offers distant affection. To Elizabeth, polite approval. But to Edward, his only son, the words soften. He calls him beloved boy and speaks of virtue and strength. It's touching, in a how-to-parent-at-the-last-minute kind of way. Meanwhile, the royal household creaks under the strain. Meals must be prepared, gifts exchanged, documents sealed. Yet no one knows which day might be the day. There's a strange quiet urgency in the air, like a castle holding its breath. He's not yet dying in the sense that a doctor would declare, but parts of him are done already. His legs have given up, his liver is almost certainly overwhelmed, and his dreams are crowded with old faces, Anne Boleyn, Thomas More, even his younger self galloping across the tournament field with reckless joy. If ghosts do exist, they must be exhausting company by now. And so, the great Henry VIII, destroyer of monasteries, defier of popes, and collector of wives, lingers in a slow unravel. His story isn't done, far from it. But the golden trim on his tapestries feels more like stage dressing now. The lion is wheezing, the throne creaks, the courtiers pray for clarity, and the kingdom, half suspecting and half hoping, braces for the coming end. By now, winter grips England like a clenched fist. The air is sharp enough to taste, and the Thames freezes in sections as if politely bowing to the drama unfolding behind palace walls. Inside Hampton Court, though, the chill is less visible, more sinister. It lurks not in the stone corridors or draughty halls, but in the sideways glances, the hesitating footsteps, and the way even the bravest courtiers pause before knocking. The palace is quieter than usual, and not just out of respect for the king's worsening condition. No, this is a different kind of hush, the hush of anticipation, of uncertainty, of people circling power like wolves around a fire. Henry VIII may still breathe, but within the red brick walls of his prized palace, it's clear. The rain is already flickering. The rooms closest to the king are carefully controlled. Only trusted aides, physicians, and the ever-watchful Sir Anthony Denny are allowed near. Denny, technically the chief gentleman of the Privy Chamber, now functions more like a royal firewall. If Henry is the flickering candle, Denny is the glass dome that keeps out the drafts and nosy guests. But don't let the soft voice and folded hands fool you. He knows the king's mood better than the doctors do, and when someone needs to be kept out, or ushered in, Denny is the man who makes it happen. And who is trying to get in? Well, quite a few people. There's Edward Seymour, brother to Jane Seymour, Henry's third and arguably most favoured wife. Edward smells opportunity the way hounds smell meat. He positions himself as the future Lord Protector, advisor and power behind the throne for young Prince Edward. Then there's John Dudley, ambitious and adaptable, who will one day try to marry his son into royalty. These men don't speak of ambition openly, not yet, but the way they linger in courtyards and lean too far into conversation speaks volumes. But nothing stokes anxiety quite like a king who might die at any moment, and won't. Henry drags on, day after day, hour by heavy hour. Sometimes he surprises everyone. Sits up, barks orders, dictates policies, even insists on playing cards. Other times, he's barely conscious, eyes glazed, breath shallow, and speech slurred. The unpredictability is exhausting, and that unpredictability extends beyond his health. Take the royal kitchens, for instance. The chefs still prepare extravagant feasts, dozens of dishes at every meal. Roasted boar, capons, sweetmeats, bread baked with saffron. The king eats only a fraction of it now, but tradition is tradition, and no one wants to be the cook who underfeeds a monarch with a history of unpredictable temper, especially one with a fondness for beheadings. Let's just say the royal staff stays employed by never assuming anything. Even Henry's chamber musicians are still required to show up, despite the king's indifference to their lute playing. They rehearse quietly, each strum a hopeful offering to the gods of mood management. One time the king asks for Pastime with Good Company, the song he composed in his younger years. A page scurries off to fetch the notes. By the time they return, the king has fallen asleep, snoring like a bear with bronchitis. And then there are the ministers. They speak in lowered voices, tucked into shadowy alcoves, often behind closed doors with guards posted outside. The Privy Council is fractured, like porcelain that's been glued back together too many times. Every faction hopes to survive the inevitable shift in power, and maybe even direct it. Everyone swears loyalty to the king, of course, but behind their eyes, strategy, calculation, possibly even rehearsal. One hot topic: what will happen after? They all know Prince Edward, just 9 years old, will succeed his father, but a boy king cannot rule alone. There will be regents, and where there are regents, there are rivalries. Should the council rule by committee? Should one man lead? And more importantly, who controls the flow of influence in those chaotic first weeks? These questions aren't theoretical, they're lethal. Get it wrong, and you're not just demoted, you're exiled, disgraced, or worse. The Tower of London doesn't need many excuses to welcome new residents. And what of Catherine Parr? Queen No. 6 is no stranger to danger. She's already survived court politics, a religious crackdown, and marrying a man who's more thundercloud than husband. Now she watches Henry deteriorate from beside his bedside and from just far enough away to stay safe. She reads scripture to him when he's lucid. She strokes his hand when he's fevered. But she also writes letters and visits allies, quietly weaving a safety net that might matter more in the months ahead. She's not just a queen, she's a woman with an eye on survival, and if the king notices, he says nothing. Perhaps he approves, or perhaps he's too tired to care. Either way, he lets her speak when others must whisper, lets her approach when others wait at the door. Meanwhile, rumours blossom like mould in the colder corners of the palace. Some say Henry's already dead and the council is just buying time. Others claim he's cursed by the ghosts of his executed wives. One courtier swears he saw the shadow of Anne Boleyn in the chapel, gliding without feet, her head tucked neatly under her arm like a morbid clutch purse. To be fair, that man was also sipping from a flask of questionable origin. There's even talk among the servants, half joking, half serious, that Henry might never die, that he'll outlast them all out of sheer royal stubbornness. "He's too mean to die," one laundrymaid whispers. "The devil's afraid he'll take over hell." A chuckle, a pause, and then silence. Because even jokes echo strangely in palaces preparing for a funeral. Still, the machinery of monarchy keeps turning. The Lord Chancellor still processes proclamations. Ambassadors still write letters to their sovereigns. Foreign courts, especially in France and the Holy Roman Empire, send cautious inquiries. Everyone wants to know, is the old lion still breathing? And perhaps more importantly, who will be in charge when he stops? Outside the palace walls, the people of England sense change coming. Markets buzz with nervous chatter. Pamphlets circulate, some printed secretly, asking who will lead the country next. The Protestant Reformation, still young and raw, hangs in the balance. Will young Edward continue the swing away from Catholicism, or will traditionalists seize control and reverse course? Inside, these questions are being answered not by declarations, but by dinner placements and chamber access. A glance here, a seat next to the fire there. The unspoken hierarchies are becoming visible. Power is shifting, one candlelit evening at a time. And yet, for all the planning, one truth remains. No one dares to say the king is dying. Not out loud. Not even when his pulse slows and his breath shallows. Not even when he fails to recognise his favourite hunting dogs or flinches at sunlight. To say it is treasonous. To plan too openly is to invite suspicion, but to wait too long, that's dangerous too. Sir Anthony Denny knows this better than anyone. He begins documenting Henry's condition in more detail, writing daily notes that blend medicine with politics. His updates are passed discreetly to key figures, Edward Seymour among them, and still the silence from the king's chamber grows heavier. Sometimes even the crackle of the hearth seems impolite. There is a moment, brief but chilling, when Henry calls out for Jane. Jane Seymour, long dead, buried with royal honours and still considered his true wife. It's a quiet murmur, barely audible over the whistling wind, but Catherine Parr hears it. So does Denny. Neither responds. Instead, Catherine turns away, one hand trembling just slightly, and Denny nods once, as if logging the moment for future use. Jane remains absent, of course, but her memory and the son she bore are about to reshape England. So the palace waits. Not in patience, but in purgatory. Ministers draft secret alliances, guards rehearse coded orders, the kitchen stock extra wine, and in the centre of it all, buried under silks and sweat, lies a man who once ruled with unmatched power, now slowly succumbing not to a dagger or rebellion, but to his own failing body. And yet, he lingers. Always he lingers. Somewhere beyond the heavy velvet curtains, a servant knocks with a breakfast tray. Poached quail eggs, smoked eel, and a goblet of warm ale. Because even dying kings are expected to eat like feudal warlords. But inside the royal bedchamber, time moves differently. It drips, like the wax pooling under silver candle holders, or the slow decay of a monarch wrapped in brocade and regret. Henry VIII is awake, technically. His eyes are open, glassy but alert enough to track movement across the room. His breathing rattles like a drum with a tear in the skin. And though his mouth opens occasionally as if to speak, nothing comes but air and a faint wheeze. The quail eggs go untouched. The bed itself is enormous, crafted from dark oak, hand-carved with griffins and Tudor roses, a testament to ambition and masculinity. But now it resembles a prison more than a throne. It takes 4 servants to shift the king's weight each morning, and even more to change the linens beneath him. The mattress has been reinforced twice. Rumours whisper that a carpenter was called in discreetly to add beams beneath the bed frame, because when a monarch expands to this size, even furniture must adapt or die. Today, his pain is more visible. His leg, the infamous one, is wrapped in layers of linen, but the wound has soaked through again. The odour is unmistakable, sickly sweet, like rotting meat left too long in summer sun. The royal physicians, men more accustomed to flattery than healing, hover nearby with herbal poultices and the occasional whispered prayer. None of it works. It hasn't for years. And still, the king remains. The room smells of sweat, clove oil, and faintly of rosewater, a futile attempt to cover the decay. But nothing masks the truth. Henry VIII, Lion of England, is dying 1 hour at a time. And in those hours his mind travels strange corridors. He thinks of Anne. Not Anne Boleyn, the clever one with the eyes too sharp for safety, but Anne of Cleves, the one he discarded like cold toast. She visits him in his dreams sometimes, not bitter, just curious. In one dream, she brings him a comb, in another, a mirror. He dreams of Wolsey too, the once beloved cardinal who fell from favour and died en route to trial. "If I had served God as diligently as I have served my king," Wolsey said. Henry remembers that quote. It flickers in and out of his mind like candlelight in a breeze. Sometimes he resents it, sometimes he agrees. And then there are the faces that haunt, not just drift. Catherine Howard, the cousin of Anne Boleyn, the 5th wife, the young one. Too young, perhaps. Too lively, definitely. She dances in his dreams, sometimes headless, sometimes whole. Once she simply repeats the words she supposedly screamed when arrested. "I die a queen, but I would rather die the wife of Culpeper." He jolts awake from that one often. But regret is a peculiar visitor. It never stays long. In Henry's waking moments, he rationalises, defends, rewrites. He did what needed to be done. For England, for order, for God. He says this aloud once, startling a page boy who had merely come to refill the coals. The boy bows deeply and backs out without making eye contact. No one corrects a dying king's monologue, not if they want to keep their heads. On occasion, Catherine Parr enters the chamber. She no longer tries to speak doctrine or philosophy. Those days are gone. Now she brings psalms and pressed violets. She reads quietly, her voice a soft counterpoint to the heavy breathing behind her. Sometimes Henry listens, sometimes his eyes close mid-verse. She wonders if he knows she was nearly arrested not long ago, accused of harbouring reformist ideas. She wonders if he remembers calling for her arrest, then recanting after a well-timed visit and a plea for forgiveness. She suspects he does, but like many things now, it hangs in silence between them, part of the unspoken agreement they share. I will comfort you, and you will not kill me. There are strange moments of clarity, though. One morning Henry asks for Edward. "My boy," he mutters. It's the most coherent thing he's said in hours. They summon the prince, who arrives in a flurry of velvet and caution. 9 years old, fair-haired and pale, Edward approaches the bedside like a man visiting a lion's den, one where the lion might be asleep or might suddenly remember his roar. Henry lifts a hand, trembling, swollen, and beckons the boy closer. Edward leans in. For a moment there is silence. Then Henry mutters, "Be good. Be strong. Trust God, not men. Say." It's not a grand speech. No thunderclaps, no royal decrees. But it's enough to make the chambermaids wipe their eyes and the councilmen exchange glances. Because when a king starts talking like that, everyone knows the end is near. And yet, he lingers. He lingers through the turn of the year, through the feast days and the long winter nights. The court continues its awkward dance, pretending the king is just ill, not dying, planning for succession while swearing loyalty to a still-breathing sovereign. Ministers come and go. Papers are signed, some by Henry, others with a shaky stamp or a facsimile, added by those with access to the royal seal. Historians still argue whether these late signatures were truly authorised or quietly forged. It wouldn't be the first time ambition borrowed the king's name. One such paper is a revised version of Henry's will. Edward Seymour is listed prominently. So are a handful of others, some reformist, some conservative. It's a carefully balanced web meant to keep England stable during Edward's minority. But everyone knows it's a gamble. A council of equals rarely stays equal for long. Meanwhile, the royal dogs, once pampered with pheasant and scraps from the king's own hand, now whine restlessly outside the chamber. Henry used to love his dogs. They hunted with him, slept at his feet, and followed him like furry courtiers. These days, he barely notices them. But one morning, a small terrier slips through the doorway and hops onto the foot of the bed. The servants panic, but Henry, for the first time in days, smiles, just a little, and mutters, "Bruno." No one corrects him. Bruno died years ago. But the terrier stays until dusk, curled beside a monarch who once ruled continents and now can't lift a spoon. It's a strange sort of intimacy, watching someone die. Stranger still when that someone once held the power of life and death over an entire nation. Now he can barely hold a cup. One night he tries to rise, declares in a hoarse growl that he will attend mass. The room freezes. Servants rush to assist. Robes are fetched. But he collapses back onto the mattress before his feet even touch the floor. He falls asleep minutes later, still muttering about the blessed sacrament. And yet, even in this twilight, there are flashes of that old Henry, the man who split the church, broke the monasteries, and thundered across Europe with arrogance and style. He shouts once in his sleep, "France is mine," and Catherine Parr nearly drops her book. Another time he calls out for Thomas More, the very man he executed for refusing to bend to his will. "Tom," he whispers, "you should have said yes." The irony is not lost on the listeners, but dreams aside, Henry spends more and more time drifting. Time doesn't seem to matter. Days blur. Even the physicians stop bothering with hourly check-ins. They come twice a day now, once to confirm he's alive, and once to make sure he still will be tomorrow. The atmosphere inside the palace shifts subtly. Curtains are drawn tighter. Candles are kept burning all night. A tailor is summoned to prepare mourning garments just in case. And in the background, Catherine Parr quietly moves her belongings to another wing. She's not fleeing, she's surviving. And Henry, he's remembering, or trying to. One evening, as snow begins to fall outside the narrow-leaded windows, he asks for music. Not loudly, but with enough clarity to cause a ripple of excitement. A lute is fetched. A small group of musicians assembles in the outer chamber. They play softly, Courtly tunes, religious hymns, and finally green sleeves. A melody long rumoured to have been penned by Henry himself. It's probably not true. Musicologists debate the origin endlessly, but the king believes it, or wants to, and tonight that's enough. He doesn't speak, but a tear forms in one eye and rolls down his cheek. No one mentions it. Eventually the music fades, the fire dims, and Henry drifts back into sleep. The bed creaks as he shifts, a candle gutters. Outside the snow continues to fall, quiet, cold, and endless. The morning begins with a thud. Not a dramatic one, just the dull sound of a book slipping from a physician's hand as he dozes in a chair beside the hearth. But in a palace so tightly strung with tension, even small sounds ripple like cannon fire. The king stirs slightly, then settles again, sunk deep into a half-sleep that has become his default state. He lies as though already embalmed, arms splayed, jowls slack, the grandeur of monarchy lost somewhere under folds of flesh and fever-damp linen. This, perhaps, is not how kings are supposed to die, but this is how Henry VIII is dying, and it's not quick, nor is it clean. Much of the drama now centres around one terrible thing, the leg. The wound, festering, unrelenting, and very possibly infected to the bone, has become something of a character in its own right. It has a presence, a reputation. It decides what kind of day the king will have. Some days it merely aches. Others, it pulses with pain so intense Henry weeps openly, then shouts at anyone within earshot. The physicians attempt various treatments, though calling them treatments might be generous. Poultices made of figs and flour, vinegar washes, leeching, cauterization with hot irons, and yes, on at least one occasion, an ointment including boiled red ants. Because if you're desperate enough, ants start to sound medicinal. Nothing works. One particularly bold surgeon suggests amputation. The room falls silent as though the word itself has caused offence. Henry glares at him, then croaks something that might be, "Leave us." That man is never seen near the bedchamber again. Historians still argue whether it would have helped, or just hastened the inevitable. But at this point, help is a relative term. The wound oozes, constantly, and the bandages must be changed multiple times a day. It takes 2 men just to lift the leg, another to hold the cloth, and a 4th to wipe the sweat from the king's face. The smell is notable. 1 chambermaid fainted, 2 requested reassignment. Eventually they start lighting candles and scattering lavender throughout the room, which helps, but only in the way perfume helps a barn. The ulcer isn't just a medical problem, it's symbolic. This festering, untreatable sore has become a metaphor for everything Henry cannot control. The march of time, the fading of his strength, and the growing instability of his realm. Once his body had been a weapon. Now it's a warning sign. And yet, even as he lies rotting alive, Henry demands control. He insists on hearing reports. He asks for court gossip. Who's rising? Who's falling? He still receives ambassadors, though it takes nearly an hour to prepare him, sponging sweat, combing thinning hair, applying rouge to make him look less corpse-like. His words come slowly, with long pauses and occasional garbled phrases. But the ambassadors pretend not to notice, because even now, even like this, he's still Henry VIII. There's a moment during one such audience, when the French envoy bows a little too long, a little too low, that Henry lets out a chuckle. A raspy, half-broken thing that turns into a cough, but still a chuckle. He rasps, "They bow better now than when I had teeth." The room doesn't know whether to laugh. One brave soul does, and Henry rewards him with a slight nod. Yes, the fire hasn't gone out completely. At night, the king dreams, often of youth, hunting in Windsor Forest, kissing Anne Boleyn under a May tree, debating theology with Thomas More before things turned difficult. Sometimes he dreams of battles, banners snapping in the wind, arrows falling like rain. He wakes muttering orders in Latin. "Ad dextrum! Ad dextrum!" The servants just nod and tuck him in again. One particularly troubling night, he wakes screaming. "They're coming! They come for me! Look at them!" He points toward the dark corner of the room, eyes wide with fear. No one sees anything. A priest is summoned anyway. Confession is offered, but Henry refuses. "Not yet," he whispers. "Not while I still hold breath." It becomes clear. Henry is afraid to die. He who sent others to the block with the stroke of a pen now shrinks from the veil. He He delays confession because, as rumour has it, he worries about the finality of it. That once he confesses, he is surrendering. That God will judge him not by the weight of his crown, but the blood on his hands. And there is a lot of blood. Some of the clergy argue over how to minister to him. Bishop Gardiner favours tradition, Latin rites, sacraments, confession. Others, like Archbishop Cranmer, favour reform, scripture in English, grace over guilt. There's even tension over whether the king should receive communion in both kinds, bread and wine, or just the bread, as per the old custom. These sound like small arguments, but in 1547 they're essentially theological landmines. And in the middle of it all lies the king, sweating, groaning, occasionally lucid, mostly not. A dying body surrounded by doctrinal war. Strangely, during one of his more lucid mornings, Henry asks for music again. This time not for himself, but for the servants. "Let them have cheer," he murmurs. "They have earned it." Musicians are summoned. They play in the great hall while the staff eat honey cakes and drink warm cider. It's a strange moment, brief and surreal, but it softens something. For 1 hour the palace feels almost like a home again. That night Henry sleeps deeply. A servant swears she hears him muttering the names of his wives, all 6, in order. Catherine, Anne, Jane, Anne, Catherine, Catherine, as if reciting a spell or an apology. No one dares ask what it means. Another open question. Why does the king seem to delay death? He is clearly unwell. Even the optimistic physicians are quiet now, and yet he endures. Some suggest he's waiting for something. Others think he simply doesn't know how to let go. A few believe he's afraid Edward won't be ready, that his kingdom will splinter without him. Or maybe, and this is just a theory, he's too stubborn to die on someone else's schedule. The ulcer worsens. It now seeps through linens within minutes. A special poultice is prepared using ingredients from as far as Venice. It stings so badly Henry tries to strike the man applying it. He misses, but the effort leaves him gasping for half an hour. Eventually, Denny begins preparing the final arrangements. A coffin is ordered discreetly. Royal tailors begin sewing black armbands. Embalmers are consulted, quietly behind closed doors. A book of funeral rites is reviewed and annotated. Catherine Parr weeps in private. Edward is moved to another residence for rest. Ambassadors send letters home with carefully worded updates. And through it all, Henry persists. One final detail. The smell. It can no longer be ignored. Even the tapestries reek of infection. The servants burn orange peels and frankincense by the bundle. A physician proposes covering the king's wound in gold leaf for purity. He's ignored, but the idea itself, covering rot with splendour, feels on brand. Eventually someone whispers, "It is time." No one says it aloud, but everyone hears it. The door to the king's chamber stays closed most of the day. Catherine Parr visits once more, kisses his forehead, and says a prayer. Denny takes a seat at his side. A priest is summoned. Henry says nothing, but he doesn't resist this time. As the priest prays, Henry's eyes flutter. He mutters something unintelligible. Denny leans in close, but it's already too late. The candle by the bed flickers. The ulcer pulses once more, and then stillness. But not death. Not yet. Somewhere in the distance a bell tolls. Not for death, but for the hour. Time continues its routine, even if the king no longer does. Inside Henry's chamber, everything is motionless. The fire crackles politely. The tapestries barely stir. Outside the frosted windows, London dozes beneath a crust of snow. It is January now, 1547, and the King of England lies in a standoff with the Reaper, neither willing to concede. Then his eyes open again. Not wide, not fully, but enough to confirm the obvious. Henry VIII is still alive. The attendants flinch like schoolboys caught whispering. A physician drops a quill. Denny, unshaven and bleary-eyed, bows his head in what might be relief or disbelief. This, somehow, is more exhausting than a funeral. Death is expected. Lingering? That's just rude. By this point, Henry's waking hours are sparse and strange. He eats almost nothing. He drinks only warm ale, and even that with difficulty. Yet some part of his mind clings to formality. One morning, after several hours of stillness, he suddenly rasps, "Council!" It takes the household 3 hours to gather the right men. And when they arrive, cloaks dusted with snow, faces pale with caution, Henry says only, "Too many. Come back fewer." Even now he edits his audience. The strange thing is, his mind still flickers with shocking clarity at times. In one rare window of lucidity, he discusses naval reforms with a precision that stuns even his ministers. He talks about shipyards and gun decks and French incursions like he's planning a campaign next spring. Then, just as suddenly, he stops mid-sentence, stares at the flames and whispers, "Jane loved the sea." This is a new detail. No one is quite sure what it means, but no one interrupts. Meanwhile, the court adapts. Slowly, subtly, it begins acting as though Henry is already gone. The council meets more frequently without him. Catherine Parr is quietly sidelined, her influence waning by the hour. She senses the change, the bowed heads that won't meet her eyes, the guarded tones in every conversation. She begins packing her things, not with haste but with a calm urgency, as though she's reading from a script she's rehearsed before. Elsewhere in the palace, Edward Seymour sharpens his smile. Technically, he's Edward's uncle. Functionally, he plans to be England's de facto ruler the moment Henry draws his final breath. He's already assembling allies, whispering assurances, smoothing egos. A regency council will rule during the boy king's minority, but everyone knows those words are wallpaper. Power sticks to confidence, and Seymour exudes it, like a man who's already tried on the crown in private. Meanwhile, Henry continues his slow collapse. He no longer reads, writes, or dictates. His hand is too swollen for a pen. When he tries, the ink spatters uselessly across the page. At one point, a clerk suggests using a stamp with the royal signature, but the idea is quickly shelved. Too risky, too obvious. Instead, documents begin to appear with vague authorizations. As the king directs, one reads. According to His Majesty's known wishes, says another. The Great Seal is affixed to each, often without the king present. Historians still argue which were truly endorsed and which were hopeful guesses rubber-stamped into history. But the business of kingship continues. That's the thing about monarchies. They're built to survive the monarch, and while the government hums along like a cart with a wobbly wheel, the king's personal space becomes increasingly surreal. One chamber is now used exclusively for prayers. Another is filled with gifts from visiting nobles, gold goblets, embroidered slippers, even a mechanical clock shaped like a lion that growls on the hour. Henry never sees most of them. His bed remains his kingdom, and in this kingdom, meat still rules. Despite his condition, the kitchens continue preparing feasts. Some say it's tradition, others suspect it's denial. The platters arrive with roasted venison, glazed duck, spiced apples, and suckling pig. Henry might taste a mouthful once a day. More often, the food is carted away untouched, fed to dogs, staff, or simply wasted. But it must be made, because a king, even one half dead, cannot be seen wanting for roast goose. Ironically, this extravagant diet, once a symbol of power, is now a symbol of futility. Physicians whisper that Henry's gout is worsening, that his kidneys may be failing. His urine is thick, dark, and occasionally flecked with blood. His bowels move irregularly, and when they do, the process is so arduous it leaves him whimpering. The privy chair, a special velvet cushioned device, requires 3 men to operate now. Still no one speaks of death. Not officially. One morning, Henry opens his eyes and asks, "Am I dying?" The room freezes. Even Denny is speechless. Finally, a young page clears his throat. "Only God knows, Majesty." Henry closes his eyes again and mutters, "Then God better tell me soon." That day he refuses all food. He sends everyone away except for his confessor and his dog. The dog, a small greyhound with nervous eyes, stays curled at the foot of the bed. The confessor, a silent priest with a voice like buttered bread, asks if the king is ready for last rites. Henry shakes his head. Not yet. Still, the priest returns daily, carrying a small vial of holy oil and a parchment of prepared prayers. The conversations are brief. Sometimes they happen in Latin, sometimes English. Occasionally Henry asks questions. Will I see my wives? Do they know what I did? Is God tired of kings? One time the priest doesn't answer right away, just pats the king's arm and whispers, God is not tired of mercy. Henry nods slowly, but he doesn't look convinced. Outside the bedchamber, the whispers grow louder. When will it happen? What should we do first? Have the heralds been informed? Even the guards begin to rotate more cautiously. Messages are sent to London, quietly instructing the royal printers to prepare mourning proclamations. The Lord Chancellor meets with the Archbishop of Canterbury behind closed doors. A list of funeral guests is drafted. So is a seating chart. You know death is near when people start worrying about seating charts. And then, finally, something changes. One morning the king doesn't stir, not when spoken to, not when touched. His breathing is faint, ragged. His pulse is detectable only by the most experienced fingers. Denny checks. So does the confessor. They nod to each other. The end is close. But Henry has one more surprise. As if summoned by some stubborn final impulse, he opens his eyes that night. Just for a moment. He looks around the room, expression unreadable. Then he speaks, clearly, distinctly. Monks. Singing. It's not a request. It's a memory. Or maybe a wish. A few hours later, a choir is assembled in the hall outside his chamber. They sing plainsong chants, slow, droning, holy. Inside, Henry breathes more shallowly. The sound soothes him. His fingers twitch. His lips move. No one hears the final word. But a few hours after dawn, Henry VIII, King of England, France and Ireland, Supreme Head of the Church of England, once husband to 6, father to 3, and slayer of many, draws his final breath. The room is silent. No great thunderclap. No angels descending. Just the last exhale of a body that has, at last, surrendered. There is no immediate announcement. That would be impolite. Instead, the room is cleared. Denny locks the door. The physician writes something down. The priest says a final prayer. Outside, the snow has stopped. The sky is blue and indifferent. And inside, on a bed larger than most people's bedrooms, lies a man who once shook Europe. Now still. Death, for a king, is not merely personal. It's a public performance, and one that must be tightly choreographed. But in this moment, immediately after Henry VIII finally surrenders to the inevitable, there is no pageantry, no tolling bells, no royal proclamations echoing down cobbled streets. For a time, there is only quiet. The silence is strategic. Sir Anthony Denny, the man who has served as both nursemaid and gatekeeper these last months, does not immediately send word. Instead, he orders the chamber sealed. The few witnesses to the king's final breath are sworn to discretion. The doors are locked, the windows shuttered. To those beyond the thick oaken walls, it looks like the king is simply resting. But everyone inside knows the king is dead. And now comes the part that history books tend to gloss over. The scramble. Not the noble mourning, not the solemn procession, but the urgent, hushed, careful manoeuvring of men who have waited far too long for this moment and know the danger in moving too soon, or too late. One of those people is Catherine Parr. She receives the news before it is news, a glance from a lady in waiting, a subtle change in how the guards salute. She's a smart woman, this 6th and final wife. She doesn't scream or faint. Instead, she sits down in a chair by the window and does something rare in Tudor court life. She breathes. For Catherine, survival has always been about timing. She married the king late in his life, loved him as well as she could, and navigated dangerous waters with a grace that would make a swan jealous. Now, with the king gone, her status is immediately ambiguous. She's no longer queen, not exactly, but not quite a widow of the ordinary variety either. She's the Dowager Queen, a title that carries weight, unless the new regime decides otherwise. She wastes no time. Letters are written to secure her estates. Trusted allies are summoned. She knows her position could collapse the moment someone powerful decides she's inconvenient, and so she leans into her dignity, her intellect, and most of all, her silence. While others plot, she prepares, but Catherine is not the only one calculating next moves. The real game now shifts to the Privy Council. They've been waiting, planning, practicing speeches in mirrors. Now, with the king's death still unspoken, they gather behind closed doors. There's a lot to discuss. The announcement, the succession, the funeral, and most crucially, the regency. Edward is 9. That means someone must rule for him, at least in practice, if not in name, and that someone is, predictably, Edward Seymour. He wastes no time either. As Henry's brother-in-law and the uncle of the new king, Seymour has positioned himself for this moment with all the patience of a cat watching a birdcage. He's tall, composed, and speaks with the confidence of a man already trying on invisible crowns. Within hours he convenes with the rest of the council, and, with a modest shrug, suggests a structure for Edward's minority. A Lord Protector, he says. Not a king, of course. Just a temporary guardian of the kingdom. For the boy, for stability, for continuity. Everyone knows what it means, and everyone knows fighting it now would be suicide. So they nod. Some with agreement, some with resignation, a few with gritted teeth. The moment the last seal is affixed to the document declaring Seymour Lord Protector of the realm, something strange happens. The kingdom belongs in name to Edward VI, but in truth it shifts from one Edward to another. Meanwhile, Henry's body lies cold. There's a protocol for this. A very royal, very specific protocol. The corpse must be washed with rosewater, dressed in crimson and ermine, and placed in a lead-lined coffin. But none of it can happen until the death is formally announced, and that, unbelievably, is still being delayed. It's a tactic. The longer Henry is alive, the longer the court has to stabilise, to organise, to make sure Edward is safe, to ensure the council is united, at least publicly. It's also a risk. If word leaks too soon, chaos could follow. Rival claims, civil unrest, opportunistic nobles with delusions of grandeur, so they pretend. For 3 full days, Henry VIII is both dead and alive, a ghost king presiding over a kingdom where every whisper is a liability. The council issues orders in his name. Servants are instructed to speak carefully. Even the kitchens continue cooking for him. Dishes arrive at the chamber door and are quietly removed untouched. A performance of monarchy without its star actor. Historians still debate the ethics of this delay. Was it manipulation, prudence, or simply a case of we weren't quite ready yet? Whatever the answer, it works. By the time the announcement is finally made, the pieces are already in place, and the announcement when it comes is as grand as expected. Heralds dressed in black ride through London. Church bells toll. A proclamation is read aloud in the squares. Henry VIII, by the grace of God, is departed this life. The people gasp. Some weep. Others cheer quietly behind closed shutters. The reactions are as mixed as his reign. He was a tyrant and a visionary, a monster and a maker. He gave them the Church of England and the Tower of London. He gave them Elizabeth and Edward and Mary, and now he gives them silence. The official mourning begins. Black cloth drapes the palace corridors. Nobles don dark garb. Court activities cease. Jesters are sent away. Even the falcons are cloaked and stilled. The kingdom sinks into ritualized sorrow. Inside the palace, the embalming begins. It is not pleasant work. Henry's body, large in both girth and symbolism, requires significant effort. The stench is already an issue. Physicians note signs of internal decay. Darkening fingertips, bloated flesh, leaking wounds. The embalming is done quickly, and then the king is sealed into a coffin made of lead and oak, triple-lined. He will lie in state for days. Painted panels surround his bier, adorned with Tudor roses, lions, and the royal coat of arms. A wax effigy stands above him, dressed in full regalia, holding a sceptre and orb. To the public it looks as though Henry watches over his own funeral. In a way he does, but even in death, things go wrong. During the long, slow procession from Whitehall to Windsor, where Henry will be buried beside Jane Seymour, his true wife, a strange incident occurs. At one stop the coffin begins to leak. Yes, leak. A dark fluid seeps from the seams, staining the floor. It is quickly cleaned, but not before someone whispers the inevitable. The king runs, as he ran others. It's probably just decay. But the symbolism is irresistible. The procession continues. It takes several days. The roads are muddy, the weather cruel. Mourners follow on horseback, heads bowed, feet sore. Monks chant, priests weep, horses stumble. At Windsor, the tomb awaits. Constructed years earlier for Wolsey, ironically, who never occupied it. Now Henry does. The man who built and broke a nation is finally lowered into the earth, and beside him, Jane. They say he asked for this, that he loved her best, that she gave him the son he needed and died before he could ruin it. Maybe it's true, or maybe it was convenient, but in death they lie side by side, entombed in history and in stone. The final service is grand as expected. Trumpets, Latin hymns, royal banners, and a choir of boys singing so sweetly it cuts through even the coldest air. The Archbishop delivers a eulogy that focuses on Henry's piety, his vision, his strength. No mention of wives, or executions, or ulcers, just the image of a monarch devoted to God and country. It's the kind of spin that would make modern PR departments weep with envy. And then, at last, the tomb is sealed. Henry VIII is gone. But his story, his mess, his children, his church, his consequences, has only just begun to echo. And up above, back at court, Edward Seymour begins giving orders. The dust on Henry's coffin hasn't even settled before daggers begin to glint. Metaphorically, of course. Or mostly. In the halls of Whitehall, power does not so much change hands as it slithers, smoothly, quietly, not with the clang of rebellion or the roar of an army, but with the scratch of quills, the reshuffling of seating charts, and the thud of locked doors. The king is dead. Long live the king. And yet the king is also 9 years old and has a habit of looking to the adults in the room for whether he's allowed to speak yet. Enter the Privy Council, a collection of some of the most ambitious men in England suddenly and inconveniently unified by a common problem: how to run a country while pretending they're not each trying to run it alone. At the centre of this slow-moving bonfire is Edward Seymour, Earl of Hertford and newly minted Duke of Somerset. If Henry VIII ruled with thunder, Edward prefers velvet. Smooth, gentle, persistent. He doesn't shout. He doesn't need to. After all, he's now the Lord Protector of the realm, an unofficial king in all but name. And here's the kicker. Henry VIII, in one of his few lucid parting gestures, never actually named a Lord Protector in his final will. The plan had been for a balanced council of equals to guide Edward VI through his minority. But a council of equals is a myth built on polite lies and long knives. Edward Seymour knows that better than anyone. So what does he do? He has himself declared Lord Protector anyway. It's a bold move. Some on the council hesitate, others grumble privately, but no one stands against him, not yet. Because Edward is clever. He brings gifts. He promotes the right people. He makes promises that sound like favours and threats that sound like advice. And in the absence of Henry's roar, Edward's whisper fills the vacuum. Now, let's talk about this council. A finer nest of rivalries, ambitions and egos you won't find this side of a Shakespeare play. There's John Dudley, Earl of Warwick, a charming shark who smells blood in every meeting. There's Archbishop Cranmer, the gentle reformer trying to steer the country toward Protestantism with soft hands and sharp doctrine. There's Bishop Gardiner, a Catholic holdover who reads every Protestant pamphlet like it's a personal insult. And let's not forget Thomas Wriothesley, who's basically what happens when a bureaucrat gets hungry for power. All of them theoretically working together to guide a child king. All of them secretly rewriting their wills to include more land and fewer competitors. Their meetings begin civil enough. There's tea and parchment and just the right amount of bowing. But beneath every discussion about trade, about taxes, about military posts, lurks the question no one says aloud: who gets to steer the ship now? Edward Seymour doesn't wait for that question to be answered. He takes over the king's personal apartments. He appoints new members to his household. He even moves into a palace previously reserved for reigning monarchs. The symbolism isn't subtle, but it's effective. Edward VI, young and eager to please, refers to him fondly as uncle, which is adorable and strategic. Because anyone challenging Edward Seymour now also challenges the boy king's security. Meanwhile, the mood among the people is twitchy. England is still nursing wounds from the dissolution of the monasteries. The economy is shaky. There are food shortages in the north, taxes are high, and religion, a hot mess. Catholicism has been stripped, but Protestantism hasn't fully taken root. Parishioners kneel in half-empty churches, uncertain whether they're supposed to chant in Latin or English. One priest starts a sermon with "We believe," and ends with, whatever the council says this week, But the people are watching, closely. They remember the turbulence of Henry's rule. Wives vanishing, nobles executed, monasteries pillaged, and while they might not mourn his death, they're deeply suspicious of what's next. A child king? A council of nobles? That's not exactly reassuring. Back in the palace, the council plays a delicate game. They must appear united, decisive, and divinely appointed. So they issue proclamations in Edward VI's name. They tour churches. They stage pageants. One especially enthusiastic member suggests a mural of Henry handing a sword to his son. The idea is rejected. Too on the nose, and yet for all their manoeuvring no one challenges Seymour directly. At least, not yet. Because he's smart. He doesn't just grab power, he decorates it. He surrounds young Edward with loyal tutors, all Protestant-leaning. He fills the boy's schedule with Greek, Latin, scripture, and just enough archery to keep things masculine. The boy eats it up. He's bright, obedient, and already convinced he's been chosen by God to lead a moral renaissance. Edward Seymour couldn't have asked for a better puppet, but even puppets can pull strings, eventually. Let's zoom out for a moment. Across Europe, the death of Henry VIII sends ripples. France and the Holy Roman Empire eye England cautiously, wondering if the young king is ripe for manipulation. The Pope, still salty from that whole Church of England thing, hopes a regency might open the door to reconciliation. Spoiler, it won't. Under Seymour's watch, Protestant reforms accelerate, Mass is simplified. English replaces Latin in most services. The Book of Common Prayer begins taking shape. Statues are quietly removed from churches. The bones of saints, once worshipped, are quietly retired to the shadows. And that brings us to one of the unspoken tensions bubbling beneath the surface: revenge. Henry VIII ruled with terror. He imprisoned, beheaded, exiled, and silenced anyone who crossed him. Now he's gone. And some of the people still walking around, particularly on the council, either lost loved ones or watched their friends fall under Henry's axe. The question becomes, now that the tyrant is dead, do we clean house? The answer, for now, is no. At least, not publicly. Instead, revenge takes on a different flavour. A soft revenge. A bureaucratic purge. Laws are reviewed. Old allies of Henry are nudged out of positions. Some are offered foreign posts. Others are accused of mismanaging estates. A few simply stop getting invited to council meetings. That's Tudor politics. Death by paperwork. And yet, even as the council consolidates power, they can't escape one lingering truth. Henry is still in the room. Not physically, of course, but in every decision they make, every speech they give, every law they tweak, his shadow looms. They quote him constantly, they invoke his legacy. As the late king wished becomes the go-to phrase for justifying almost anything. The irony. Many of them are doing precisely what he never would have allowed. The council begins discussing land redistribution, something Henry hoarded like a dragon with real estate. They consider relaxing some of the stricter religious edicts. They even talk about marrying off the young king to a Protestant princess, a move that would have made Henry's moustache curl with rage. But these men know what they're doing. They're not erasing Henry. They're reframing him, turning the man into a myth, then shaping that myth to fit their narrative. It's history as fan fiction, and they're writing fast. Even the way they plan his funeral says something. It's grand, yes, but not too grand. The emphasis is on majesty, not fear, on stability, not supremacy. There are readings, prayers, and eulogies, but the rhetoric is measured. One speaker praises Henry's firm hand, but another slips in a subtle nod to the need for fresh vision in this new reign. Fresh vision. Translation. We're changing things now. And in the centre of all of this change is a boy king who still needs help tying his shoes. Edward VI doesn't realise it yet, but the next few years will shape not just England's future, but the fate of his sisters, his council, his faith, and maybe even the monarchy itself. But for now he listens, he nods, he signs what he's told, and occasionally he asks when he'll get to ride a real horse instead of a ceremonial pony. He is earnest, eager, and almost certainly doomed to grow up too fast. The real question is, can the men around him keep their daggers sheathed long enough for England to survive? Edward is cold, not because the royal apartments lack heat. There are enough fireplaces in Hampton Court to roast a herd of oxen. But because he is 9 years old and 9-year-olds, even ones wearing ermine-trimmed cloaks, don't quite understand how to be kings. It's been only a few days since he officially became Edward VI, sovereign of England, Ireland and France in theory, and supreme head of the Church of England in title. The crown doesn't fit, literally. It's been padded with velvet and pinned to his hair for ceremonies, but it still wobbles when he turns his head too quickly, which he does often. He's excitable, curious, still boy enough to find the echo in the great halls amusing. Yet everything around him now demands he be something else. From dawn till dusk, Edward is surrounded by tutors, advisors, and well-meaning adults who explain how important he is, how divine, how central to the future of England. He listens politely, scribbles Latin translations in the margins of his Bible, and occasionally forgets not to slouch. But inside he's trying to understand something much simpler. Why everyone looks at him like a glass heirloom on the edge of a shelf. The answer, of course, is that he is now the most valuable and most vulnerable person in the kingdom, and everyone knows it. Lord Protector Edward Seymour, now styled as the Duke of Somerset, keeps a close eye on his nephew. The boy calls him uncle, but their relationship is far from familial. It's a careful balancing act. Edward the boy is the monarch, Edward the uncle is the marionettist. And as long as the boy does what he's told, everyone smiles. But occasionally the boy asks questions. Why do I sign these things? Why don't I hear Mass in Latin anymore? Where is my sister Mary? These are the moments that unsettle the council, because Edward VI is not just any child, he's a precocious one. Highly educated, fluent in Latin and French, devoutly Protestant and keenly observant. He's been trained to rule since infancy, and while he's still small enough to swing his feet from his chair, his mind is already forming judgments, and not everyone passes. Take his sister Mary, for instance. She's the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, and therefore staunchly Catholic. At the moment she's in relative seclusion, tucked away in the countryside under the soft term of respectful distance. That's council speak for too dangerous to keep nearby. Mary writes letters to her brother, cordial, careful letters filled with scripture and maternal worry. Edward reads them all. He doesn't always understand the tone, but he senses something unsaid, and when he asks why she can't visit more often, he's told, "She is praying for your health." It's not untrue, but it's not the whole truth either. His sister Elizabeth, meanwhile, is more flexible. She's clever, Protestant enough, and knows how to smile without saying anything meaningful. She's allowed to visit court more frequently, and when she does, Edward lights up. They play chess. He loses gracefully. She lets him win occasionally, which he notices but doesn't mind. Their bond is warm, genuine and cautious, the kind of affection forged by shared blood and shared danger. Behind the scenes, the council monitors every move Edward makes. He's taught to write in a hand so perfect it looks printed. His daily schedule includes scripture, astronomy, history and swordsmanship. Meals are timed, bedtime is enforced, and all visitors are pre-screened. Nothing is left to chance. Even his toys are vetted. Wooden soldiers? Acceptable. Catholic relics. Outside a book of psalms? Encouraged. A deck of playing cards with mythological figures? Quietly burned in a fireplace and replaced with a copy of Fox's Book of Martyrs. All of this makes Edward obedient, but not dull. He begins to notice things. He notices that his uncle never asks permission, only forgiveness. That proclamations are issued in his name, but not by his hand. That the same men who bow in his presence sometimes roll their eyes when he turns away. One afternoon, during a walk through the palace gardens, Edward remarks to his tutor, "A king must be like a candle." The tutor blinks. "A candle, your majesty?" "Yes. You light it so others can see, but if you stand too close it burns." He's 9. That night, Somerset reviews Edward's latest diary entries. He does this often. The boy writes with the seriousness of a clerk twice his age. Some passages are charming, reflections on the Psalms or a drawing of a bird he saw on the battlements. Others are more troubling. Today I asked why Parliament must be closed to me. They said I'm not old enough, but I wonder, if I am not old enough to see them, am I old enough to rule them? Somerset folds the page carefully, then tucks it into a drawer. It may become useful someday, or dangerous. Meanwhile, the realm that Edward is supposed to lead is in flux. Protestant reforms continue, driven not by the boy but by his uncle's firm hand. Churches are stripped of ornaments. Latin is phased out. The Book of Common Prayer is prepared behind closed doors, and priests are instructed to remove images of saints. Some comply, others hesitate. In Cornwall, there are riots. Peasants storm a local church and reinstall the crucifix. In the north, murmurs of discontent echo from village to village. People aren't sure what religion they're supposed to be anymore, and that confusion is becoming dangerous. Somerset responds with proclamations, then troops. Edward is told only the gentle version. There is unrest, but it shall be soothed. The truth is less soothing. The council is balancing doctrine and diplomacy on a razor's edge, and the boy on the throne has no idea how sharp it is. In private, Edward begins to write more questions in his journal. He writes about obedience, about law, about why some people say God changes his mind depending on which priest is speaking. One entry reads, "A king must love his people, but he must also fear their love, for love can be taken back." Another, "Uncle says I must approve the new taxes. I asked who will be taxed. He said, 'Those who can afford it.' I asked, 'Who decides who can afford?' He smiled and said, 'Not you.'" Edward is beginning to understand the game. Still, for all his growing awareness, he remains isolated. He's not allowed to choose his friends. He's never alone. Even his confessions are monitored. When he falls ill, a cold, just a cold, half the palace panics. Special physicians are summoned. Prayers are held. Every breath he takes is measured by a dozen pairs of eyes, and the pressure begins to show. He becomes more formal in speech. He stops asking certain questions. He learns how to smile without blinking. He begins addressing courtiers with full titles, even in private, and when Somerset praises him, he responds with, "Your loyalty honours the realm," instead of "thank you." His innocence isn't lost, it's just redirected. And what of Henry? His shadow looms large. Edward often asks what his father was like. The answers vary. "Strong," one says. "Merciful," says another. "Feared," says a third, before being reassigned. Edward studies portraits of him. The square jaw, the regal scowl, the hands that once signed death warrants and love letters in the same sitting. He wonders if he'll ever be that kind of king. He hopes not. But part of him thinks he'll have to be. One day he asks Elizabeth, "Do you think father was ever lonely?" Elizabeth doesn't answer right away. Then softly, "Only when people told him he wasn't." That night, Edward writes in his journal, "A king is never alone, but sometimes he's the only one there." It's not a cheerful entry, but it's an honest one. And as the boy king watches snowfall outside the palace window, he knows, somewhere in that 9-year-old heart, that the crown may fit better one day. But the weight, that never gets lighter. It begins, as these things often do, with a pen and a list of names. Henry VIII is dead, buried, and encased in enough stone and symbolism to smother a lesser legacy. Yet from beyond the grave he continues to stir the pot, because the will he left behind is not just a document. It's a political landmine, beautifully wrapped in Latin flourishes and royal seals. And somewhere within its clauses and clauses about clauses lies the future of England. The problem? No one can agree on what it actually says. Let's rewind a bit. In his final weeks, as Henry faded in and out of lucidity, his will underwent several suspicious tweaks. The most notable change wasn't even made by Henry's hand. The frail king, too weak to hold a quill, reportedly gave verbal assent to certain edits. These were then executed by his close circle, primarily Sir Anthony Denny and William Paget, both loyal and pragmatic men, but not immune to suggestion. Historians still argue whether these modifications truly reflected Henry's wishes, or conveniently mirrored the ambitions of the men already positioning themselves for power. One name curiously absent, Stephen Gardiner. Gardiner, a Catholic-leaning bishop and once a trusted figure in Henry's inner circle, finds himself completely excluded from the Regency Council listed in the will. It's a curious omission, suspicious even, and many suspect the council simply didn't want him around. Too rigid, too Catholic, too likely to challenge the Protestant tide already gathering momentum. On the other hand, the list does include a charming cocktail of nobles and clergymen, some Protestant, some Catholic, most ambitious. They're supposed to rule by committee, ensuring that no single person gains too much influence over the boy king Edward VI. A tidy little fantasy. It lasts about 8 minutes. Edward Seymour, the uncle, the duke, the not-at-all power-hungry protector that wastes no time. He's already secured the boy's favour, manoeuvred his way into de facto regency, and built a loyal power base. Now, with the will in hand, he begins rearranging things. First, the council's balance is quietly tilted. Titles are granted. Opponents are encouraged to retire. A few are dispatched on distant diplomatic missions that just so happen to keep them out of England. One poor soul is made ambassador to Portugal. Lovely weather, terrible proximity to decision-making. Seymour has the will reread aloud in council, where he nods solemnly at every phrase as though hearing them for the first time. When someone suggests that Henry had meant for the council to rule together, Seymour replies gently, "Indeed." And it is precisely because the council must act with harmony that one must lead it. He smiles. The room does not argue. He then secures an official patent from the young king, stamped and witnessed, confirming his authority as Lord Protector. It is, in every sense, a masterstroke, legal enough to hold up, sneaky enough to raise eyebrows, and efficient enough that by the time anyone objects, it's already policy. Meanwhile, the boy King Edward is still signing documents in his perfect handwriting, mostly unaware that some of them authorise the shifting tectonic plates beneath his throne. One of those plates, land ownership. Henry's will, as it turns out, is rather generous. He leaves parcels of royal land to various nobles and courtiers as tokens of gratitude, or perhaps as bribes to ensure a smooth succession. It's hard to say. Some of the allocations are expected, others feel suspiciously improvised. Paget receives a generous estate. So does Denny. Seymour? Oh, he's just buried in properties now. Whole manors, castles, forests. There's even talk that he's acquiring enough territory to rival a small duchy. And of course, every transaction is stamped with the golden seal of His Majesty's final wish. Convenient, no? This sudden burst of generosity, known later as the New Year's gift bonanza by historians with a sense of humour, has a ripple effect. Nobles who receive land become fiercely loyal. Those who don't? Not so much. Grumbling starts to fester in the corners of the court, particularly among old-school conservatives who feel that Henry's legacy is being auctioned off like a Tudor yard sale, and still the council pretends all is well. Behind the scenes, William Paget, secretary fixer and low-key mastermind, writes memoranda urging caution. He likes Somerset, but not this version. The Duke is moving too quickly, too arrogantly. "Be not too stiff in your authority," Paget writes in one particularly spicy letter, "so that your power be not abhorred." Translation: don't be the next Henry VIII. People are still twitching from the last one. Seymour nods thoughtfully when he reads it, and then proceeds to ignore it. Meanwhile, there's a new issue. What to do about Prince Edward's half-sisters? Mary and Elizabeth were both reinstated in Henry's succession plan, though with asterisks the size of cathedrals. They would inherit the throne only if Edward died without heirs. This theoretically makes them second and third in line, but in the minds of the council, they are something far more dangerous. Alternatives. Mary, devoutly Catholic and nearly 30, commands a quiet but passionate following. Her religious beliefs are no longer fashionable at court, but she has allies, especially among the common people, many of whom still cross themselves when walking past churches despite the new rules. Elizabeth, meanwhile, is young, sharp, and politically ambiguous. She's Protestant-leaning, but she's also her mother's daughter, and the memory of Anne Boleyn still makes some courtiers twitch. Somerset decides on a policy of smother with courtesy. Mary is kept at a respectful distance. Officially, she is beloved. Unofficially, her movements are watched, her letters intercepted, and her chaplains interrogated. Elizabeth is treated more kindly, largely because she knows how to play the game. She flatters. She writes eloquent letters. She speaks only when it's useful. The council isn't quite sure what to make of her, which is exactly how she likes it. And then, inevitably, someone asks about Henry's mistresses. Yes, he had them. No, he didn't officially acknowledge most of them. And yes, there's at least one rumoured bastard child, Henry Fitzroy, Duke of Richmond, who died young, conveniently removing one more succession complication. Still, gossip lingers like chimney soot. But in the end, the council chooses to focus on one thing: legitimacy. Only legitimate heirs matter. Henry said so. The will says so. And if the will says so, then it must be true, even if large swaths of it were edited by men who stood to gain from those edits. At this point you may be wondering, What did the will actually say? In short, Henry left the crown to Edward, followed by Mary and Elizabeth, then a string of distant relatives descending from his sister, Mary Tudor. He set up a regency council of 16 men to rule until Edward came of age, with no single man to dominate, and he instructed that his religious reforms should be continued according to God's word, vague enough to be interpreted, specific enough to be weaponized, and weaponize it they do. Over the next few months, the council uses the will to justify everything from tax reforms to church demolitions. The king would have wanted this, they say, every time a cathedral window shatters or a friar is replaced with a Bible-reading schoolboy. And so, Henry's final words become not a peaceful conclusion but a loaded script, rehearsed, revised and performed by a cast of power-hungry courtiers determined to keep the show running. Somerset builds a palace for himself, Paget keeps writing warnings, and Edward, small and serious, keeps signing papers he barely understands. The will, once thought to be the final act of a mighty reign, turns out to be something else entirely, a prelude. Because Henry VIII, master of spectacle, has given England one last performance. He made his death feel like an ending, but it was only ever an intermission. The torches outside Whitehall flicker in the wind, casting long shadows that twist across stone and tapestry. And in those shadows the ghost of Henry VIII still lingers, not as a man, but as a looming presence, a question mark, a threat. Because while his body rests beside Jane Seymour in a tomb lined with gold and scripture, his memory walks the palace corridors with heavy, unpredictable steps. Those who survive Henry do not breathe easy. They glance over shoulders, they listen for footsteps that aren't there. And some begin to see ghosts everywhere. It starts with dreams. Somerset dreams of his brother, Thomas Seymour, whom he both loves and fears depending on the day. But sometimes, just before waking, he sees Henry too, seated in full regalia at the foot of his bed, glaring, silent, disappointed. Disapproval wafts off him like incense. Somerset wakes sweating, heart racing, as if he's just been scolded by a corpse. Others have similar stories. A courtier sees Henry's face reflected in a goblet. A lady-in-waiting insists she heard the king's voice echo from the chapel royal. A groom claims that while polishing a suit of armour once worn by the monarch, he felt a slap on the back of his head and a voice growl, "That's not how it's done!" Most of these are dismissed as nerves, imagination or indigestion, but the fear is real. Because Henry VIII, even in death, remains a source of anxiety. His judgments were final, his punishments legendary, his favour as dangerous as his wrath. And many of the people now claiming to uphold his legacy betrayed him in some small way before he died, and they know it. But beyond the ghost stories lies something far more dangerous: suspicion. Paranoia begins to bloom inside the palace like mould in damp stone. The power vacuum Henry left behind was not filled, it was disguised. Somerset may wear the velvet robes and speak with the smooth tongue of a regent, but others are sharpening their ambitions like hidden blades. John Dudley, the Earl of Warwick, watches quietly. He is no fool. He supported Somerset, yes, but he also knows that power borrowed is still power taken, and Somerset, in his haste to control everything, is making enemies faster than he can reward friends. Take the matter of the king's safety. Edward VI is protected, certainly. He's surrounded by guards, tutors and advisors, but some whisper that it's less about protection and more about containment. The boy may be royal, but he is also isolated. He speaks only when spoken to, dines with pre-approved guests, and reads a carefully curated selection of books. When he begins asking about the Tower of London, Somerset nervously changes the subject. "I should like to visit it," Edward says one morning while eating a poached pear. "To see the history?" asks his tutor. "To see the prisoners," the boy replies, not unkindly. That afternoon, half the council convenes to debate whether he's too curious for comfort. But Edward is no fool. He knows he's being watched. And as with all intelligent children, that knowledge only makes him more observant. He begins taking longer pauses before answering questions. He listens more, speaks less. One morning he catches Somerset whispering with Paget near the door. They stop when they see him, smile too quickly, and bow too deeply. "I hope," Edward says, "that my Lord Protector does not need to be protected from me." It's a joke, mostly. Still, the air chills slightly. Meanwhile, the court itself becomes a theatre of suspicion. The windows of the council chamber seem to breathe with secrets. Courtiers lower their voices when they pass statues of Henry. Superstitious? Perhaps. But no one wants to take chances. A portrait of the dead king is quietly removed from one corridor, not out of disrespect, but because several members claimed it watched them. Even Archbishop Cranmer, a man of God and reason, feels the strain. He dreams of his old friend Thomas More, of Catherine of Aragon, of fire and Latin chanting. One morning he writes a sermon about judgment, reads it aloud in his chamber, and then burns it in the hearth before anyone else can see. The court, like the kingdom, is haunted, not by ghosts, but by memory, fear and guilt. And then there's the matter of the seal. Henry's Great Seal, an ornate object used to authorise royal documents, was supposed to have been destroyed upon his death. That's tradition. The new monarch gets a new seal. But for weeks afterward, the old one keeps appearing, affixed to edicts, clutched in the hands of men who swear they're finishing Henry's business. Eventually, someone locks it in a chest and buries it beneath Whitehall. That should have been the end of it. It's not. Late one night, a clerk swears he hears a thud from the storage room. He finds the chest cracked open and the seal sitting atop it, glinting in the moonlight. He requests a transfer to Ireland. But perhaps the strangest effect of Henry's lingering presence is on the law itself. The council continues issuing proclamations in the spirit of the late king. Some are routine, others less so. One edict requires every parish to display a copy of Henry's final portrait. Another mandates that his writings be studied in grammar schools, alongside scripture. There is even a motion, thankfully denied, to declare June 28th Henry's birthday, a national holiday to be celebrated with solemn music and hearty meat. The lines between respect, loyalty and obsession begin to blur. Because how does one move on from a king like Henry VIII? He was not merely a ruler, he was an era, a hurricane in doublet and hose. His decisions reshaped the landscape, politically, religiously, culturally. And now that he's gone, the people left behind don't quite know what to do with the echo, so they pretend he's still watching, which is, in a way, true. Young Edward dreams of him often. Sometimes Henry is smiling, guiding his hand as he signs a law. Other times he looms large and disapproving, correcting his grammar mid-sentence. Once, in a particularly vivid dream, Henry says only, "Do not disappoint me," and vanishes into a wall of fire. Edward wakes from that one in a cold sweat. He writes in his journal, "I think father is not gone. I think he watches." Later he writes, "Perhaps a dead king governs better than a living one." The council does not read these entries, but if they had, they might have slept even worse, because they too know the truth. Henry's reign is over only in form, not in spirit. They speak his name when they need authority. They cite his will when cornered. They invoke his memory when their policies fail. He's both sword and shield, used to cut down dissent or defend incompetence, and this cannot last. There's only so long one can govern by ghost. Tensions begin to rise. Somerset's authority is questioned, subtly at first. Paget, once his ally, grows uneasy. Dudley grows bolder. The council, meant to be collaborative, fractures. The room grows colder, literally and figuratively. One night, a storm rolls across London. Thunder shakes the windows. A flash of lightning splits the sky. And as the rain hammers the palace roof, Edward Seymour sits alone in his chambers, staring at a portrait of Henry VIII. He studies the eyes, the expression, the tilt of the head. "You left me this mess," he whispers, "and they think I'm the villain." He raises his cup. "Here's to your ghost, then." He drinks. The portrait does not answer. But in the hallway outside, a candle snuffs itself out. Midway through the cold spring of 1547, long after Henry VIII has been sealed into his marble tomb, and England's courtiers have resumed their dangerous sport of smiling with knives behind their backs, an unexpected visitor steps into the shadows of Whitehall Palace. He wears black, always. His hood is low, his presence discreet. Most courtiers assume he's some mid-ranking cleric or a confessor from a minor parish summoned to offer prayers for the boy king's continued health. But behind closed doors, whispers call him something else, the king's last confessor. A figure both real and mythical, and whether by myth, memory or fear, The name makes grown men uneasy. Let's rewind to the moment Henry VIII supposedly summoned him. The accounts differ. Some say Henry requested final confession in his last lucid hours. Others claim the king refused it outright. A few allege he muttered fragments of the Lord's Prayer before slipping into unconsciousness, while more fringe rumours, preserved in the half-smirking margins of ambassadorial letters, suggest something stranger happened. According to one version, Sir Anthony Denny, that most loyal of bedchamber shadows, brought a priest named Father William Forrest into Henry's rooms just before dawn on the day he died. Forrest had served Queen Catherine of Aragon and was known for his soft voice and sharp eyes. It's said Henry looked at him and asked, "Do you believe God forgives kings?" A reasonable question, if you hadn't ordered thousands of executions, dismantled the church in England, and gone through wives like decorative gloves. Forrest's answer, depending on which source you trust, was either yes if they ask, or only if they repent. It's not clear whether Henry answered either way. What is clear is this. Forrest remained in the room for a long time. No one heard what was said. No one ever found notes. And when the door opened again, Henry was asleep, and Forrest left silently through the privy gallery, never to be seen at court again. Until now. And now that he's returned, it's unclear what he wants, or what he remembers. He doesn't approach the Privy Council directly. He doesn't deliver proclamations or write dramatic letters. He simply begins visiting people, quietly, individually. He speaks first with Archbishop Cranmer. They walk together in Lambeth Palace gardens, speaking softly. Forrest asks about the direction of the church. Cranmer answers in careful phrases. Forrest nods, says nothing for a long time, then finally murmurs, "He mentioned you." Cranmer pauses mid-step. "What did he say?" Forrest smiles. "That you prayed more when you were unsure." Later, Cranmer burns 3 sermons and rewrites a 4th. His next homily includes the line, "Even the strongest believers must sometimes find faith in their fear." It is widely quoted and narrowly understood. Then Forrest visits Catherine Parr. Now the Dowager Queen, she lives in relative peace but wears anxiety like a hidden locket. She receives Forrest in her drawing room, amid books and tapestries stitched with verses from Psalms. "You were there," she says immediately. "At the end," he nods. "Did he mention me?" Another nod. She doesn't press. Instead, she offers him wine and they speak of scripture, specifically the Epistle to the Romans. When he leaves, she gives him a copy of On the Freedom of a Christian, dog-eared and lightly annotated. The next morning, she donates an entire chapel's worth of relics to the poor and burns a stack of her late husband's marginalia on purgatory. Whispers spread fast. Some claim Forrest is gathering secrets. Others think he's confirming old ones. A few believe he is carrying out the king's last instructions, some hidden spiritual testament whispered in that final confession. Paget, ever the strategist, begins tracking Forrest's visits. So far, he's spoken to 4 members of the council, 2 ambassadors, and 1 artist who painted Henry's final portrait. No one can agree on what he wants. One courtier says Forrest speaks of mercy. Another insists he muttered something about unfinished business. A third claims he asked if the council had considered exhuming the bones of Thomas More and giving them a proper burial. Somerset, Lord Protector, is not amused. He summons Forrest. It's not a command, more of a strong invitation. Forrest accepts and appears in Somerset's solar the following evening. They speak alone. We don't have records of that conversation. But what we do know is that after Forrest leaves, Somerset tears up a draft policy on property seizures from former abbeys, throws a goblet at the fireplace, and doesn't sleep for 3 nights. One version of the story claims Somerset asked Forrest what Henry's greatest fear was, and Forrest answered, "Being forgotten," a simple phrase. But for a man like Henry, obsessed with lineage, legacy, and control, it's perhaps the deepest cut. Now, let's get weird. A month later, rumours begin to surface that Forrest has been seen walking through the crypts beneath St. George's Chapel, alone, after hours. A guard swears he heard chanting. Another says he saw candles flickering inside the royal tomb. A third claims he heard a voice say, "Your soul is not yet quiet." The rumours are absurd, of course, except that they aren't entirely dismissed. You see, part of Henry's will included instructions for dozens of perpetual masses to be said for his soul. a standard practice in Catholic Europe but deeply awkward for an England moving swiftly toward Protestantism. Cranmer, under pressure from reformers, had quietly reduced the frequency of these masses after Henry's death. Now, Forrest's return throws a spotlight on that decision. What if, some wonder, Henry did make a final plea for forgiveness? What if he wanted the old rites, Latin masses, candles and incense? And if he did, what does that mean for those who denied him? Suddenly, people who've been cheerfully stripping altars and smashing stained glass start second-guessing themselves. Not publicly, of course, but late at night, in whispers, in hurried notes passed behind closed doors. In one particularly wild twist, a Protestant preacher in Kent claims he received a vision in which Henry appears surrounded by flames, demanding prayers. The preacher is arrested, of course, but his words echo. Even kings cannot silence what they did not confess. Forrest disappears soon after. No one knows where he goes. Some say he sailed for the continent. Others believe he entered a monastery in disguise. A more theatrical rumour suggests he was buried alive in a sealed chamber beneath Westminster, where his chanting can still be heard on stormy nights. But the damage is done. In the months following his visit, policy slows, reforms stall. Somerset begins avoiding personal appearances, citing fatigue. Cranmer revises the Book of Common Prayer to be slightly more accommodating to traditionalists. Catherine Parr begins hosting closed-door Bible discussions with Mary and Elizabeth at the same table. The council grows twitchy, and Edward, the boy king, writes a strange line in his diary. They speak of father as though he were sleeping, but I think he hears, I think he waits. It's unclear what prompted it. But that night, the candles in the Chapel Royal burn low and won't relight. The wax sticks, the flames gutter, and in the silence one boy kneels alone in prayer, asking not for victory or wisdom or even strength, but for clarity. Because perhaps, in the end, what haunts this kingdom most is not what Henry did, it's what he left unsaid. The snow begins early that January, falling in slow, deliberate flakes over the rooftops of London, like powdered gilt. By the end of the first week, the city is blanketed in white. Pure, clean, deceptive. It crunches beneath the boots of courtiers and commoners alike. But the cold that seeps into Whitehall Palace is not just the cold of weather. It is the cold of waiting. It is now January 1547. The longest night is not on the calendar. It is in the hearts of those who serve the boy king and those who served the one before him. Inside the royal palace, the torches are low, curtains are drawn, steps are quieter. Sir, Henry VIII is dead, but not yet dead, at least not officially. For while his breath has long ceased, and the royal physicians have ceased their vigil, the public still believes he lives. For days, the announcement is withheld. The reasoning is strategic. Somerset and the council must prepare the transition, ensure the new regime is wrapped in authority before the truth spreads and the realm begins to tremble. So they maintain the fiction, wrapping the halls of power in silence and lies. But the lie cannot hold forever. Even now, small cracks form. A kitchen maid notices that the trays she carries to the king's apartments return untouched day after day. A foreign envoy writes back to his master in Madrid, noting that His Majesty does not appear and has not been seen by mortal eyes in nearly a week. A court musician confides to his brother that the king's room smells of vinegar and wax. People know, or rather, they almost know, and that's worse. Certainty can be managed. Suspicion breeds panic. Inside the royal apartments, the final preparations are being made. The embalmers have done their best, but the body, once regal, commanding, and larger than life, now lies in a darkened room, drained and diminished. The rot of his festering leg wound still lingers in the air, mixed with rosewater and holy oil. The servants dare not speak, but many breathe through linen soaked in lavender. Candles are lit at all hours, not for ceremony, though that will come, but because the darkness has become unbearable. At night, some claim to hear groaning from the king's chamber. Others say it's the sound of the wind passing through the tapestries. One man swears he saw the curtain stir and nearly fainted. In this surreal purgatory, Henry VIII is both present and absent. His body rests, immovable. His name is whispered in present tense, and his death looms like a storm cloud too proud to break. Among those who visit the chamber is Sir Anthony Denny. Loyal until the end, Denny remains the keeper of Henry's final secrets. The murmured words, the drifting confessions, the strange requests made in half-sleep. He visits the room each day, speaks aloud as if the king can hear, and ensures that the corpse remains a king until it is safe for him to become a memory. On the 7th day, Denny stands at the foot of the bed and speaks quietly. It is time. And so the veil is lifted. The council convenes in haste. The room is sombre, but tense. These men, Somerset, Paget, Cranmer, Wriothesley, Dudley, are not just grieving, they are calculating. A dead king is a problem. A dead king with no adult successor is a crisis. Still, the announcement must be made. The task falls to Edward Seymour, who wears black with an ease that suggests he chose it for style as much as mourning. He reads the proclamation aloud in front of the assembled peers of the realm. Be it known unto all subjects of this realm, and to Christendom abroad, that our sovereign lord, King Henry VIII, departed this life upon the 28th day of January in the year of our Lord 1547, and that his son and rightful heir, Edward VI, now reigns. No one cheers, but no one objects. Immediately, preparations for the funeral are set in motion. The wheels of monarchy, long idle beneath the weight of waiting, begin to turn, and in the private chambers of the palace young Edward is informed. He does not cry. He listens carefully. He asks 2 questions. What will happen now? And did he speak of me? The answers are soft, vague, reassuring. Then he asks for a Bible. The first public sign of mourning appears with the tolling of the great bell at Westminster. It begins slow, one chime, then another, a third. Across the city the people pause. In markets, hands still. In churches, kneeling resumes. In taverns, even the drunken grow quiet. They do not yet know exactly what has happened, but they know something has ended. The royal court is flooded with black fabric. Drapes are drawn. Servants change uniforms. The Queen Dowager's household enters a period of mourning, and her correspondence shifts to more cautious tones. Elizabeth writes a simple line in her diary, "Now begins the season of shadows." For the people of London, it is the waiting that is hardest. When the news finally spreads, it arrives not with clarity, but with a whisper wrapped in frost. Town criers in every parish square read the same words Seymour spoke, followed by a list of prayers to be offered and detailed schedule of mourning rituals. And then, suddenly, Henry is everywhere. His face reappears on banners, his likeness is painted and hung in churches, his name is spoken from pulpits and printed in broadsheets. He becomes paradoxically more visible in death than he had been in his final years. No longer a groaning giant in a curtained bed, he is rebranded as a saint of English sovereignty. But not everyone mourns. In the north, Catholic households lock their doors and pray, not in grief but in hope, that the changes Henry wrought might now be reversed, that the boy king's reign will be short, that Mary, the true daughter of the true queen, might restore the old faith. In the west, peasants offer toasts in his name to the king who broke the monks and fed the poor. Even if it's not quite true, the legend serves. In London, the black market for Tudor relics explodes. Someone sells a spoon Henry supposedly used, another a handkerchief that wiped his brow. One enterprising butcher offers slices of the king's last roast for £1 apiece. Back inside Whitehall, the council meets daily. Somerset declares himself not only Lord Protector, but also Governor of the King's person, a title invented to ensure no one else could influence Edward directly. The move unsettles even his allies. William Paget, who once championed Somerset's rise, now warns him in private letters, "You climb quickly, my lord, but the fall from such heights is not slowed by prayer." Somerset ignores him. Meanwhile, Edward is kept occupied with ceremony. He is dressed in mourning black, velvet and gold. He receives dignitaries, bows with solemnity, repeats the words given to him. "I grieve for my royal father. His wisdom was my first lesson. England shall not forget." The boy does not cry in public, but he begins to write more. In one entry, "They say I am king, but I cannot go outside." Another, "Father taught me that kings must not tremble, but I do not think he taught me what to do with silence." And then, beneath a blot of ink, one line scrawled quickly, "I think I am afraid." He's not the only one. For while the funeral is planned with grandeur, horses draped in black, a procession of nobles, the king's body to be transported to Windsor with full honours. Something feels off. The delay in announcing his death has unsettled the populace. Some suspect foul play. Others whisper that Henry didn't die at all, that he lives in secret, recovering in a far-off palace. One pamphlet claims he walks again and will return to punish those who move too quickly in his absence. In one parish, a statue of Henry is said to weep. None of this is true, of course, but it's telling. Because the kingdom, for all its ceremony, has not healed. The night before the body is to be moved to Windsor, snow falls again. A soft, steady covering. Courtiers wake to find the palace blanketed white once more. And somewhere in the darkness, beneath the weight of centuries and the silence of stone, the body of Henry VIII lies still, wrapped in crimson, watched by no one, and yet not entirely alone. For all around him, the kingdom breathes shallowly, waiting for what will come next. A king is gone. But England holds its breath. There's a peculiar tension that settles over a kingdom when its monarch has died, but the funeral hasn't yet occurred. It's like the stillness before a thunderstorm, not calm exactly, but suspended, unnatural. And in the case of Henry VIII, the delay between death and burial is not a matter of logistics, but of spectacle. Everything must be perfect, and perfect in Tudor terms means enormous. The king who founded a new church, decapitated friends and wives alike, and built an empire out of appetite and authority, could not, be seen off with anything less than a royal epic. This is not just a funeral. It's a message, a last word, a final act in a reign that never quite knew when to exit the stage. And so, on the first day of February 1547, with the air still cold and the frost still clinging to branches like sleep-deprived regrets, the King of England begins his final procession, sort of. You see, the first few days are a lie. Henry's body remains inside Whitehall Palace, locked within a lead-lined coffin encased in oak, and covered with the richest velvet the royal wardrobe could muster. He lies in state, surrounded by banners bearing the royal arms, with candles burning day and night, each flame a solemn reminder of the weight that once sat upon the chest, now unmoving beneath the fabric. Above him sits a lifelike effigy, dressed in coronation robes, complete with crown, orb, and sceptre. It smiles down at visitors with that same expression Henry wore in his later portraits. Half stern, half smug, all power. For those who missed his final years, this is the Henry they remember. Still upright, still majestic, still terrifying. And for 3 full days the people come to see him. Nobles bow, bishops pray, ambassadors murmur Latin condolences. The common folk weep, cross themselves, or, more often, watch with a blend of awe and suspicion. After all, some of them lost homes, lands, even relatives under this man's rule. Mourning him is complicated. Some do it anyway, others pretend. But on the 4th day the real drama begins. The coffin is placed atop a grand funeral chariot, a massive black carriage gilded in gold, pulled by 8 horses draped in matching black and silver cloth. The entire thing looks more like a mobile cathedral than a wagon, its wheels polished to a mirror shine, its windows shrouded in silk. And then come the mourners. Not a few dozen, but hundreds, knights in armour, archbishops in crimson, judges in robes, trumpeters, standard-bearers, squires, pages, all moving in deliberate rhythm, each step choreographed, each face cast in the appropriate blend of reverence and frostbite. Even the horses seem to walk more slowly, as though they too know that this man, this body, once altered the world with a nod. At the head of the procession rides Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset, chin high, gaze steady. Not because he mourns, but because everyone is watching. His role in this moment is as much about performance as it is about power. And in the middle of it all, silent and regal in a black velvet cloak trimmed with ermine, rides young King Edward VI. He is quiet, stoic. His hands rest in his lap, clenched just tightly enough to keep from shaking. He understands, at least on some level, that he is now the living face of the realm. His father's death is not just a loss, it is an inheritance of power, of expectation, of debt. He has rehearsed his expressions in the mirror. He rides like a king. The procession moves slowly through London, a city that watches from behind shuttered windows and crowded alleyways. People line the streets, some out of reverence, others curiosity. Few cheer, most stand silently. Some toss flowers, a few kneel, and when the chariot rolls over the uneven cobblestones of Cheapside, it creaks ominously. No one reacts outwardly, but several nobles exchange glances. It creaks again, louder this time. A craftsman in the crowd mutters, "Should have used stronger wheels." He's arrested for blasphemy an hour later. The first mishap comes at a small inn along the route. The procession stops overnight so that the horses and men can rest. The coffin, never left unattended, is placed in a secure chamber lined with tapestries and heated with braziers to keep the frost from seeping into the bones of history. But in the morning, when the guards return to move the body, they find something unpleasant. A dark stain beneath the coffin, and a smell that no amount of rosemary can hide. The embalming, while thorough, has failed to fully preserve the king's considerable remains. The council acts quickly. Curtains are drawn, the chamber is sealed, the chariot is discreetly reinforced, and no one speaks of it again. But the story spreads anyway. By the time the funeral reaches Windsor, the legend has already taken shape. The king leaked. Some say it's divine judgment, others say it's poetic justice. One court poet writes privately, "He who drained England in life now seeps in death." It's funny, dark, and immediately suppressed. At Windsor, the final ceremony is held in St. George's Chapel. It is as grand as anything in Henry's life. Choristers sing motets in polyphonic Latin. The Archbishop of Canterbury delivers a sermon that praises the king's strength, his reforms, and his unyielding love of divine truth. It artfully sidesteps any mention of wives, wars, or beheadings. The coffin is lowered into the vault beneath the choir, beside Jane Seymour, the only wife buried with him, the one who gave him a son, the one who died before she could disappoint him. There are murmurs that this was always his plan, that he loved her most. But others suspect something simpler, that Jane was useful. She gave him legitimacy, lineage, and a legacy. The kind of partner whose death required no apologies. And with that, the service ends. Trumpets sound. The nobles file out. The choir sings one last anthem, Requiem aeternam dona eis Domine, and the great door of the chapel closes with a boom that echoes like thunder through the empty corridors of royal power. Just like that, it's done, or so they say, because while the body is buried, the man remains, in letters, in laws, in ledgers, in memories, and most of all, in fear. You see, the problem with a funeral as large as Henry's is that it leaves an equally large absence behind. The realm doesn't feel relief, it feels unmoored, like a ship that has dropped anchor in unfamiliar waters. The people wonder what comes next. The nobles wonder how long Somerset will rule, and Edward, small, solemn, steady, wonders how he can ever live up to the man whose coffin cracked on the way to paradise. A week after the funeral, the boy king writes a note in his diary. "Father is buried, but I feel him everywhere. When I speak, I wonder if it sounds like him. When I write, I remember his hand correcting mine. When I sleep, I dream of him on a throne that never ends." He closes the book. Outside, the snow melts. Inside, England begins to change. But beneath the stones of Windsor, wrapped in velvet and soaked in legend, the lion of the Tudor dynasty slumbers. And the echoes of his roar are only just beginning to fade. The king is dead. The funeral is over. The banners are folded, the horses stabled, and the velvet cloaks, those ceremonial shrouds of borrowed gravitas, return to the royal wardrobe. Now comes the strangest part of royal death. The aftermath. The part where everyone must figure out how to speak of the late monarch in the past tense without letting go of him entirely. And for Henry VIII, letting go proves difficult. Windsor, where his body lies interred beside Jane Seymour, should be the final act. The curtain fall, the end credits, but within weeks, he's everywhere again. His name saturates documents, sermons, court gossip. Even the coins bearing his face remain in circulation, clinking with authority in every market stall and tavern. But nothing cements a legacy like rumour, and Henry's, it turns out, is extremely well stocked. Take, for instance, the case of the ominous cracked coffin. It begins innocently enough. A sexton, one of the lowly men charged with tending the chapel crypts, notes a crack forming near the edge of the king's sarcophagus. Stone, after all, is not eternal, especially when faced with shifting foundations and damp Tudor winters. But then he tells someone, who tells someone else, who tells a monk with a fondness for drama. And soon the story mutates. By the time it reaches London, the tale is that Henry's tomb has split open of its own accord, and that a black mist escaped from within and whispered the names of his wives. Totally false, totally unprovable, totally popular. Even a few council members hear versions of the story, whispered behind fans and goblets of spiced wine. Bishop Gardiner, ever the Catholic loyalist, grumbles that it's a sign, the wrath of God made manifest. Cranmer rolls his eyes so hard it nearly dislocates something. But privately, even he hesitates before refuting it. That's the nature of Henry's legacy. It's layered, complicated, heavy, and increasingly hard to manage. The young King Edward VI, meanwhile, is adjusting to power with the grace of a boy trying to wear a suit of armour 2 sizes too large. He signs laws, he listens to advisers, he practices his handwriting and avoids eye contact with courtiers who ask too many questions. But his father looms over everything. There's a running joke in the council, spoken only in closed rooms of course, that nothing gets approved unless someone says, "This is in line with King Henry's vision." The phrase becomes a sort of spell, used to justify policy changes, suppress dissent, and soothe the nerves of older nobles still emotionally tethered to the dead king. One declaration allows more church property to be sold off. It is explained as consistent with the late king's noble desire to fortify the crown's finances. Never mind that Henry, toward the end, actually regretted selling so much land. That detail is quietly ignored. Another act restricts public preaching. In accordance with His Majesty's intention to preserve order in doctrine, the document reads, that Henry once changed his theological views twice before breakfast. Again, unimportant. He becomes a kind of royal Ouija board. Whatever you need, Henry can be conjured to support it. But not everyone plays along. In certain corners of the realm, especially the north, where Catholicism still simmers quietly under the surface, there's pushback. Farmers and labourers speak of the old days when monks healed the sick and fed the poor, when candles glowed in chapels and bells tolled for saints. To them, Henry is not a hero. He is the man who tore down God's houses and replaced them with taxes. Even within the court, unease brews. Edward Seymour, Lord Protector, grows restless. The longer he holds power, the more he realises just how deeply Henry's shadow extends. Every bold reform he proposes is met with whispered warnings. Henry would not have allowed this. Remember what happened to Cromwell. Best not tempt the ghost. Eventually, Seymour stops mentioning Henry at all in council meetings. It's a subtle shift, but people notice. He begins speaking instead of England's future, of Edward's enlightened reign, of our duty to the living sovereign. The older nobles flinch. Padgy raises an eyebrow. John Dudley, the calculating Earl of Warwick, watches in silence, and that silence is telling. Dudley, unlike Seymour, understands the value of myth. He watches as Seymour slowly distances himself from the icon of Henry, and he sees opportunity. Quietly, he begins to drop comments in court. The late king understood the burden of rule. The boy is bright, but can he shoulder what his father bore? Some men forget they are servants of the crown, not heirs to it. It's veiled, but deliberate and effective. By midsummer, the council is divided into 2 camps, those who cling to the memory of Henry as a standard for governance, and those who seek to move on. Neither group fully trusts the other. Alliances shift. Letters are intercepted. One ambassador writes home, "They pray to a dead king and fear a living boy. I have never seen such trembling at both ends of a throne." And amid all of this, the people do what people do best. They tell stories. Taverns echo with new Henry tales. Some true, many fantastical. One says that Henry once ate a whole peacock and then ordered the feathers stitched into a cape. Another insists that in his final hours he confessed not to a priest, but to a mirror, and the mirror cracked under the weight of his sins. One favourite is that Henry was buried with a sword forged from the iron shackles of every prisoner he ever pardoned. This would be a very short sword. But even among these tales, something shifts. Henry stops being a man and becomes a symbol of power unchallenged, of rule without hesitation, of a time when the king decided things rather than asking for committee votes. For those nostalgic for authority, it's comforting. For those trying to build a gentler, more Protestant realm, it's inconvenient. But regardless of how anyone feels about it, one fact becomes undeniable. Henry's death has not ended his reign. It has elevated it. Death has transformed him, finalised him, made him tidy in a way that life never could. The contradictions of his rule, the tenderness and the cruelty, the laughter and the rage, are now reduced to paintings and phrases. Defender of the faith, builder of the English church, father of a New England. The mess has been cleaned up, the jagged edges filed down. In portraits he always looks majestic. No ulcers, no bloat, no broken marriages, just the illusion of control. And Edward, poor, thoughtful Edward, feels the weight of that illusion every day. He writes in his journal, "They say father was mighty, but they do not say what it cost him. I wonder if kings are ever happy. Sometimes I hear him in the marble floors. His tutors grow concerned. His guards tighten their watch. The council begins drafting even more proclamations in his name. And behind the high walls of palaces and parliament, the New England Henry promised is being built atop the bones of the old one, stone by stone, law by law, myth by myth. And somewhere beneath St. George's Chapel, the man himself lies still, or appears to. Because one night, during a terrible summer storm, lightning strikes the chapel spire. The wind howls through the crypts, and a sexton swears he hears 3 knocks from inside the royal tomb. He's never seen again. But the legend? Oh, the legend lives on. It's been over a year since Henry VIII's body was lowered into the vault beneath St. George's Chapel, Windsor. The seals are in place. The ceremonies have faded into memory. The velvet hangings and mourning cloaks have been folded away, some reused, others quietly discarded. But his shadow has not lifted. If anything, it's grown longer. Because this is the final legacy of a man like Henry. Not just policy, not just children, not even the colossal break from Rome. No, his true legacy is uncertainty. The England he left behind is not a well-oiled machine humming along in Protestant harmony. It's a tangle of nerves, ambition and fear, held together by etiquette and duct tape. And at the centre of it sits a boy who is doing his very best. Edward VI wakes each morning in a room lined with portraits of his father. They hang from the walls like silent judges. The most prominent is that infamous Holbein painting. Henry standing tall, legs apart, arms akimbo, eyes daring the viewer to blink first. Edward studies it often. Not out of admiration exactly. More like someone trying to decode a myth. Is this what kings are supposed to be? He once asks his tutor. The tutor, caught off guard, stammers something about courage and responsibility. But the truth is, no one knows anymore. What Henry represented to his son and to England is something both powerful and contradictory. Strength without mercy, vision without caution, faith without humility. He built a church for himself, a government of yes men, a family stitched together from wives and whims. And when he died, all those pieces started shifting like tectonic plates. Edward's council, now increasingly under the sway of John Dudley, the ambitious Earl of Warwick, has begun moving away from the more cautious policies of Somerset. The tide is turning. Protestant reforms accelerate. Bishops are replaced. Latin is banished from pulpits. The Book of Common Prayer is finalised and distributed, and every decree is stamped with Edward's name, though his hand has barely touched the ink. But that's not the part that haunts. What haunts is the question that lingers in every corridor, every conversation, every law passed in his name. What would Henry have done? It's a paralysing refrain, invoked by conservatives trying to slow the reforms, by radicals trying to speed them up, by generals advocating for wars Henry might have once considered, and by courtiers defending decisions with nothing more than a shrug and a name. When a new cathedral window is installed with clear glass instead of stained saints, someone mutters, "Henry would have smashed it himself." When a bishop is arrested for preaching sedition, another replies, "But Henry loved bold words, so long as they were his." He becomes, in short, a phantom excuse, and in that role he is both more dangerous and more convenient than he ever was in life. Edward feels this keenly. He's only 10, then 11, then 12, and already he knows more about doctrine than most grown men. He debates transubstantiation over breakfast. He corrects his tutors with Latin phrases lifted from Erasmus. He writes long, impassioned essays about the responsibilities of Christian kingship. And yet, despite his intelligence and sincerity, there's always a quiet undercurrent. You're not your father. He's too thin, too kind, too thoughtful. Henry had presence. Edward has intellect. Henry commanded fear. Edward earns respect. but respect is a slower, quieter thing. And in a kingdom still reeling from decades of whiplash, slower and quieter are often mistaken for weakness. And that perhaps is the tragedy of these final days, not just of Henry, but of those who survived him. The children, Mary, Elizabeth and Edward, were each, in their way, formed in the crucible of their father's contradictions. Mary, denied legitimacy, clings to a tradition like a lifeboat. Elizabeth, watching carefully, learns the art of survival through silence. And Edward, too young to remember the man in full, is tasked with living up to a story that never stopped changing. What few realise is that even in his final days, Henry was uncertain. He gave orders that contradicted previous decrees. He endorsed policies that undermined his past. He praised both Protestants and Catholics, sometimes on the same day. One afternoon, weeks before his death, he supposedly asked his physician, "Do you think I was right?" "Right about what?" the man asked. Henry smiled faintly. "About all of it." The physician wisely did not answer. And perhaps that's the most honest legacy of Henry VIII. Not certainty, but ambiguity. He is remembered as a tyrant and a reformer, a monster and a monarch, a man of appetites and a man of vision, someone who changed the face of a kingdom and could not change his own heart. He began his reign as a golden prince. He ended it as a myth with a wound that never healed. And now England is trying to walk the road he built, paved with gold in some places, rubble in others. Paget, ever the realist, once said it best in a letter never meant for public eyes. The king is gone, but we still wear his shoes, and they pinch. The people feel it too. Taxes remain high. Reforms confuse as much as they enlighten. The poor grumble. The nobles manoeuvre. The church wobbles between purity and panic. In some parishes, peasants still whisper Henry's name when they light candles just in case. In others, he's blamed for every ill that befalls them. A child dies, and an old woman says, "'Tis the curse of the broken saints sent by Henry's pride." And in London, on the anniversary of his death, someone hangs a crude drawing on the gates of the palace. It shows Henry on a throne made of skulls. Beneath it the words, "King of Ashes." It's taken down before the boy king can see it, but he feels it, somehow. He writes in his journal, "They speak of father as fire, but I wonder if he was smoke." By now Edward is 13. His health has begun to waver. The coughing is worse. The colour drains from his face more often. The physicians call it lung rot behind closed doors. He has less time than anyone knows, but he writes every day. He writes about governance, about justice, about faith. He writes about his father. And one entry, undated, reads like a whisper across time. "If he looks down upon me, I hope he does so with grace. I hope he forgives my gentleness. I hope he sees that I tried." And in that one line, the noise of Henry VIII, the cannons, the feasts, the declarations, the executions, fades. And what remains is a boy, in a crown too heavy, trying to be good, trying to be enough, trying to make peace with the ghost who raised the walls of his world and never gave him a door to escape. The final days of Henry VIII were not full of clarity nor triumph. They were full of doubt, of silence, of searching. And what he left behind was not a kingdom perfectly shaped in his image, but one straining to make sense of him. So now, dear listener, we find ourselves at the end of this long, winding journey, through the twilight of a king who seemed too large, too loud, too ferocious to ever truly fade. And yet, he did, just like the rest of us. The fire that was Henry VIII burned brightly, consumed everything near it, and left behind a kingdom blinking in the smoke. His children inherited not just his crown or his name, but his contradictions, his ache for legacy, his inability to say enough. If your mind feels a little heavy now, that's okay. It's a lot to hold, the weight of a man like Henry, the world he tried to bend to his will, and the echoes he left behind. But you've held it well. Let it go now. Close your eyes and imagine the last candle in that long palace hallway finally flickering out. Picture the stone walls of Windsor, cool and still. Hear the hush that follows when a legend stops speaking. Because tonight, you've walked with a king. You've sat beside his sickbed, marched in his funeral, listened to the whispers of those who feared and adored him, and now you can rest. Henry is at rest too. No more decrees, no more diets of eels and power, just stone and silence. So breathe slowly. Let the cold night drift over you like velvet, and know that even the noisiest kings in the end must grow quiet,